Hey, Inspired Moneymaker. Did you know there are schools that cannot afford to have a playground? Today we're talking about racial inequity, the importance of play, and a nonprofit that MacKenzie Scott just gifted $14 million to. This is Inspired Money. Episode 228 features James Siegel, dad of 3 play experts and senior fellow at Kaboom.
Enabling kids to play, you could talk about all these different outcomes, but it's fundamentally a question of human dignity. Like, how can we deny kids the opportunity to play? And where are they spending time? They're spending time at school, they're spending time in their community where they live, at the local park, and so forth. And if we deny certain kids those opportunities, we are denying a part of their human dignity.
I'm Andy Wong, host of the Inspired Money podcast and financial advisor at Runnymede Capital Management. Today's guest is James Siegel. He served as CEO for 5 years at Kaboom, a nonprofit that has built or improved over 17,000 Playspaces, engaged more than 1.5 million community members, and brought joy to over 11.5 million kids. Kaboom recently launched its 25 and 5 initiative to end Playspace inequity, a 5-year, $250 million plan to accelerate efforts towards achieving Playspace equity across the United States. A gift from MacKenzie Scott will allow Kaboom to immediately begin work in several places. In this episode, we get to hear how dollars and volunteers are changing communities for the better. James goes deep, even sharing his deeply personal reasons for stepping down as CEO and into a new role of senior fellow. In this episode, you'll learn how spaces for play can spark change in a community, why MacKenzie Scott's gift is different from many of her fellow philanthropists. And make sure you listen to the end to hear James talk about crypto philanthropy, the intersection of Web3 and social impact. Now let's get inspired with James Siegel. James, welcome to Inspired Money. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here with you, Andy.
Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
Well, a few things come to mind. My mom, who's retired now, was an actuary. And so money was always math and time combined. And so it usually happened around a dinner table where, when we were very young, I have an identical twin brother. And when we were at the dinner table, my mom would always be peppering us with questions like, how many quarters are in a dollar? Or if you spent, $100 on groceries a week, how much would you spend over a year? And so for her, it was always like that combination of math and time. My dad, he worked for IBM for most of his career, and he got to travel a lot. And I always remember him coming back from his trips with, bills and coins from other parts of the world. And it was just this window into community and culture and different countries that I hadn't been able to experience personally, but it gave me a sense of how different parts of the world are, the same and different. And it was always a collector's item because it couldn't be spent, where we lived. And then the third thing that comes to mind is that I was born in New York City. My whole family's from New York City. I grew up mainly outside of New York City, but I was always fascinated from a very young age with the subway tokens for New York City. And I don't know if you remember, but there was that one that had the Y from NYC cut out. And it looked like money. It looked like a coin. It was used as a proxy for money, but only in a very specific way. So that comes to mind as well.
I think I have one of those subway tokens somewhere in the back of a drawer in my house, also along with some like Garden State Parkway tokens.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm so excited to have you on the show. Today, you're senior fellow for Kaboom, where you previously served as CEO. But first, I want to talk about, you've been involved in this nonprofit and charitable sector for some time now. When you graduated from Princeton University and Harvard Law School, did you have a much different vision and view of money?
Well, it's interesting because when I was in school, at college, I actually thought I was going to become a historian. I studied African American history at Princeton. Loved the interplay of history and the law. And so as I was spending too much time in the library as a senior writing a senior thesis, I started to get more interested in doing something that would be more active and relationships based, like practicing law. And so I decided to go to law school. And in law school, I always assumed that I would end up in some type of public interest work. It was, just values that had been instilled in me from a very young age. My grandmother on my mom's side was a public school teacher in New York City and was one of the first Head Start teachers, and just grew up talking about, the need to be values based and make a difference in the world. And so I always assumed that that's what I was going to do. And then in law school, I took a lot of classes that were clinical work, doing legal services work, and really enjoyed that. And even the summer after my first year of law school, I spent working for a legal services office in Poughkeepsie, New York. And at nights, in order to pay the bills, I reffed adult basketball games, which was not the funnest experience. And so it was always like a combination of like how, you wanting to do good in the world, but also then trying to figure out how to make a life and a career out of it. And, I've been through a lot of different roles, from corporate lawyer to state government regulator to nonprofit executive. And my fundamental belief is that whatever role you have, whatever sector you're in, there's an opportunity to make a difference, because you have the ability to influence those around you. You have an ability to influence your field. And so it's really finding the thing that really feels right for you, but bringing your values to it to make a difference.
So it sounds like you got there, trying to have a positive impact, maybe with a detour in merger and acquisition corporate law work. Was it a difficult transition away from corporate law into like state and federal? Talk a little bit about that, because I know that you did some even regulation of charities.
Yeah, so it wasn't. It was definitely an interesting transition, and I had decided to try the law firm experience in my summer after the second year of law school, and it was just a really interesting experience, because I was comparing law firms based on their commitment to pro bono work and public service. That's what I was looking at. And there was one law firm in particular that was high on my list, which was Paul Weiss, because of their history of inclusiveness in the firm and also their commitment to pro bono work. And they're renowned for doing a lot of death penalty appeal cases and other pro bono work. And it just seemed like a place that had the right balance. And so when I interviewed there, in law school, especially at a place like Harvard, you sign up and then they give you your schedule. And I must have done like over a dozen interviews in a day for all these firms that came on campus. And it was like randomly assigned slots. And I got my list of the schedule, and Paul Weiss was the absolute last interview of the day. And I was like, oh, great. Like the one that I really cared about, I'm going to be exhausted. The partner is going to be exhausted. And so I get into the room for that interview, and the partner asks me, a question that I should have been prepared for, which is like, what type of law do you want to practice? And so I said, frankly, I have no idea. I just want to try a bunch of things. So I'd like to experiment with litigation and corporate law and tax and entertainment law, and just see what feels right. And he like leans forward, and I was like, oh, this is the end of the interview. He leans forward and he's like, that's the first honest answer I've heard all day. And so I lucked out. I got an opportunity to work there over the summer. I really enjoyed corporate law in a way that I didn't think I would. And I think primarily it was because if you think about litigation, it's all adversarial, and that's not my personality. but corporate law felt like bringing people together to achieve a common objective and playing the role almost like a point guard or a quarterback. And that felt very, very good to me and natural and comfortable. And I really enjoyed doing that. And I also lucked out because I was able to, at a very junior position in the firm, take a leading role in creating a transactional pro bono program for the firm. So the firm had this huge reputation on pro bono, but it was almost all litigation. And I was able to help the firm form a transactional pro bono practice that meant representing nonprofits, small businesses, and micro entrepreneurs in the city. And from that, I just like fell in love with how nonprofits try to make change happen in the world. And I wanted to do more of that. And the first opportunity that arose was in state government with the New York State Attorney General's office to regulate charities. And I thought being in a perch like that to get like that really bird's eye view of the whole sector would be a great learning experience. And it certainly was that. Even though the practice of law that I was doing there was so different from what I was doing as a corporate lawyer.
And then how did you transition from state into a federal role?
So from state government, I actually went into the nonprofit sector. I'd been working at the Attorney General's office for almost 7 years, was looking for my next challenge. We were trying to figure out as a family where we wanted to be. My wife's from from Maryland, just outside of DC. We were thinking, did we want to stay in New York City? Did we want to move down to the DC area? We just had our first child. And an opportunity arose with a nonprofit, a national nonprofit based in DC that I had gotten to know and work with through my work at the Attorney General's office. And that was Independent Sector, which is the coalition of nonprofits and foundations and corporate giving programs. And it represents the interests of the sector on the Hill and with the administration, and does best practice work as well. And it was a terrific fit because, again, it gave me this bird's eye view of the sector and allowed me to see all different areas of the sector, whether you're doing environmental work or working with kids and youth or animals or whatever it happened to be. And I really enjoyed the learning experience there, and the opportunity to join the federal government during the first term of the Obama administration came along, and it was just like, it was one of those historic moments and like something that I just couldn't pass. I was just so thrilled and felt so fortunate to have the opportunity. And I served as the chief of staff at the Corporation for National Community Service, which is the agency that runs AmeriCorps and other national service programs. And again, it was a place where it was across the whole nonprofit sector. It didn't matter what difference you're trying to make in the world. If you're doing it through some type of social impact organization, a nonprofit, the corporation had some role to play there. And so it was a really nice segue from the nonprofit role that I had, the state government role that I had in the federal government. The bigger switch was actually from the federal government to Kaboom. And
yeah, let's get into that, because I think it was when your first child was about 6 months old. What attracted you to Kaboom?
Yeah, so I found out about Kaboom when my first child was about 6 months old. That's absolutely right. And this organization that just had this elegantly simple mission, just let kids be kids, like give them the opportunity to play, because play is the fundamental building block of childhood. And being a dad and seeing how my own child was learning through playful interaction, it just felt so perfect. But it was the first time that I had gotten so connected to a nonprofit organization that had such a singular focus for its mission. And I actually volunteered with the organization, built 3 playgrounds with Kaboom before even joining the staff. So I was invested in the success of this organization before becoming a member of the organization. And it's been just the absolute most wonderful experience to be able to lead an organization that not only has this mission that I think everyone can rally around, like let's support our kids and give them an opportunity to play, but to do it in a way that's really intentional about addressing the inequities that exist in the world. And so, our mission is to eliminate play space inequity. And that inequity is tied up in the history of segregation and redlining and disinvestment in communities in the US.
Paint a picture for us of these specific places, because I think it's easy for me, since I'm in the suburbs, sometimes I take for granted that there are public parks and places that I can take my kids. And even out here, we're still fighting development, right? Like, I want to protect parks from becoming condos. Yeah. But tell us about these places that Kaboom is really addressing and trying to help.
Yeah, and I'll give you like the 30-second history, and then I'll give you an example that really brings it to life. And so, most people are aware of the fight for desegregation of schools in this country, right? The seminal Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. And what's less known about is at the same time in our nation's history, there was a fight to desegregate parks and areas for play and recreation. And in fact, there were a number of cases that were working their way through the federal court system that were specifically related to segregation in recreational places like swimming pools in the early 1950s, before Brown was decided, and it basically chipped away at that separate but equal doctrine that Brown eventually overturned. And so there's like this, parallel history that's happening when it comes to parks and playgrounds in this country. And then we all know that, Brown versus Board of Education was an incredibly important decision, but it wasn't a magic wand. It didn't solve the problem. And in fact, what you saw afterwards was violent attempts to continue segregation, and then followed by white flight from mainly urban areas, followed by significant disinvestment in the communities that remained, which were primarily Black and Brown communities. And so an example of that is that shows how that history is actually comes right up to the present is work that we're doing in Baltimore with the Baltimore City Public School System. And there, a couple of years ago, we did an assessment across the entire school district. And think about it, like elementary school. Could you imagine sending your children to an elementary school that did not have a playground at it? Like, could you imagine a kindergartner not having the opportunity to play during the school day? It just gets in the way of learning. It makes it harder to connect with friends. It hurts your ability to be physically active, all those things. And so when we did the assessment in Baltimore City, what we found was that almost half of all elementary schools in Baltimore did not have a safe place to play.
Wow.
And you can guess the demographics of those schools. I think it's something like 8% more Black students at those schools than across the city. 92% of the kids at those schools qualify for free and reduced price meals. And the lack of a playground at that school is indicative of disinvestment that is going on throughout their community. Schools, parks, libraries, everything, right? And so we've been working deeply with the school system, which has been just a tremendous partner, not just to build playground by playground, but to figure out how to solve the problem at the scale that it exists. How do you eliminate the inequity in opportunity to play across the entire Baltimore City public school system? And we've built, at this point, probably 20 or so playgrounds already with Baltimore City Public Schools. We have another couple dozen to do before every kid in Baltimore has a great place to play at their elementary school. This is a solvable problem, but it's not going to be solved by the municipal systems themselves, by the school districts themselves. It's caught up in a capital budget system that disadvantages the places that need the resources the most. And the numbers are staggering. In Baltimore, Over a recent 3-year period, Baltimore City Public Schools, I think it's something like, 165, $180 million spent for their capital budget, not for, the Playspaces, everything, school infrastructure, air conditioning units, all that. In the neighboring counties of Anne Arundel and Baltimore County, which are suburban, more affluent than Baltimore City, it's like 3 times that. And for districts that have the same number of students.
Wow.
And the state basically gives the same amount of money to each of the jurisdictions based on, basically like student population. But the localities in Anne Arundel and Baltimore County can spend much more on the capital needs in their school districts than Baltimore City can. And so not only did it start out as a problem, but the problem's getting worse and worse. The gap is getting bigger and bigger because the wealthy communities are able to spend and the ones that have experienced disinvestment are not. And so our work is like in places like Baltimore City, and the reality is that story exists in communities all across the country, whether you're talking about school systems, park systems, public housing, whatever. That gap exists and the need is there, and our goal is to try to address it.
What positive impact do you see in the wake of building a playground? Because I would imagine that in a school district that has a budget that's 1/3 of some of the more wealthy surrounding areas, it has a lot of issues to deal with. And many times, I'm sure that the playground is not at the forefront of people's minds. There are so many things that need to be taken care of.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And the way we think about it is that it's the process and the result that matter. And for us, the process requires that we engage the community deeply in the work, and that the leadership over the design and planning process is in the hands of the community, the members of the community who are most impacted by the decisions. And so our role is to bring to life their wishes for their space. And that's critically important because you want to make sure whatever you're doing is meeting their needs and not, spending in a way that's, not best suited for what they feel their priorities are. And so we start with the kids in the community. The kids are part of the design process. So we ask them what they want on their dream playground. And then we rally the community members, parents, PTA, teachers, school administrators, neighbors, and so forth to roll up their sleeves and get the work done with us. And then it culminates with building the playground together. And that creates a sense of ownership in the place, which creates a wider range of outcomes from the work. And so if you think about playgrounds, like everyone, you see kids running and jumping and stuff like that and swinging, and you're like, oh, sure, it benefits their physical ability and their physical development. But if you think of a community that's being built, it also creates the opportunity for social and emotional learning for kids, cognitive and creative development, because a lot of things that happen on a playground are about problem solving. And it creates social cohesion in the community, which leads to other outcomes like neighborhood safety or greater civic participation. And so our work is sort of like at the center of these ranges of outcomes that are at the kid level, but also at the community level. And it leads to additional work. One of the elementary schools that we built with early on with Baltimore City was in the neighborhood where Freddie Gray was from. And Freddie Gray was killed by police in Baltimore. It led to a significant outpouring of need to address inequity in the city. We built a playground there soon after. And the playground mobilized the community, and they formed the first PTA that school had in decades after we had helped to mobilize the community. And then they went on to build a library at the school and get donations of books. And so it had this ripple effect, sort of cascading steps that the community then was taking, where we were just the catalyst. Like we helped jumpstart the process. And delivered ownership to the community. And then they were able to address other needs in their community as a result, which is why the process is so important. And it links to these wide ranges of outcomes. And if you ask, school principals, there have been like surveys done of school principals, how important is it to have, recess and opportunities for kids to play? Like the numbers are overwhelming. It's like, those old commercials about like, dentists and, whether brushing your teeth and, is good for you. Right. So yes, it may not immediately come to mind as the top priority, but once you start to get into it with a community, the range of outcomes are so critically important, and we link to all of them. And if we can help mobilize the community and bring resources to the table, it becomes something that's hard to ignore. Because at the end of the day, enabling kids to play, you could talk about all these different outcomes, but it's fundamentally a question of human dignity. Like, how can we deny kids the opportunity to play? And where are they spending time? They're spending time at school. They're spending time in their community where they live, at the local park, and so forth. And if we deny certain kids those opportunities, we are denying a part of their human dignity. And that is just fundamentally wrong. And so all those things come together, I think, to create a groundswell for needing to address this problem, which is, again, something that's solvable.
It's really incredible. It's more than just dollars and building a playground in a location. I mean, the power of coming into a community and expressing, we care about your community and we care about your children, and what that can spark is just powerful. For you, James, how did it feel exposing your kids to your professional life?
Oh my God. It's indescribable. First of all, it's the first job that I've ever had where my kids actually understood what I did for a living. So I try to describe what it means to be a, government regulator or, a corporate lawyer. But I build playgrounds for a living. When I started out at Kaboom almost 10 years ago as an employee, my kids were, much younger. My youngest was 3 years old, and she could understand what I did for a living. I remember the experience of like going into one of my kids' kindergarten classrooms for, when the parents come in and talk about their jobs, and I remember being able to talk about, what it means to build a playground and talk to the kids like, do you have a playground at your school? Don't you think every kid deserves a playground? Like everyone at 5 years old gets it. And then I was walking out and I saw two dads in front of me talking, and I heard one of them say to the other, and I think one of them was like an accountant, and said to the other, how are we supposed to compete with that? So it's a great, moment of pride, but it also, like, the nature of your question was really about involving the kids in the work. And so they've come out and built playgrounds with me, which is both, great because they could see that they can make a difference, but they could also see how certain communities don't have what their community has, which is really important for kids to be able to experience directly. They've, instead of accepting gifts at birthday parties, they've, raised money for Kaboom, which has been really nice. I remember my eldest, when they were much younger, came to our office and saw like there was like candy in the kitchen, and they took like a big bowl and put the candy in the bowl, and then they walked around the office and sold the candy to my colleagues, and managed, even though it was free, managed to raise like $27 and said, this is for Kaboom. Being involved in that way, I think, just is so important for kids because they get to see how they can make a difference and gives them a sense of agency over their role in the world.
So it sounds like there's a great volunteering opportunity, because if I want to take my kids to a soup kitchen to expose them to other communities, I can similarly volunteer at Kaboom and we can be working outside, it sounds like.
Yeah, and before the pandemic, the way we built most of our playgrounds was like a barn raising style. So there would be this intensive planning process with the community, and then it would get to build day, and we would bring 200 volunteers together, half from the community and half from our range of partners, to build a playground together in 6 hours, start to finish. So you would show up in the morning and it'd be like empty holes in the ground. And then by mid-afternoon, there's this beautiful new playground. And so like the transformative impact for a volunteer experience is just incredible. And the ability of bringing people together from all walks of life is really important too. You know, we've had the benefit of working with, Fortune 100 companies, and you have the CEO of a Fortune 100 company rolling up their sleeves next to a mom whose kid is going to be able to play on the playground at their school for the first time. It's magic. And, with the pandemic, like every other organization, we've had to adapt, and our focus is making sure that whatever the, constraints are, that we're creating meaningful moments for people to participate and to contribute to a community that they care about.
Let's talk about the pandemic for a moment and the financials of nonprofits generally, because under your leadership, Kaboom was in a good financial position during this difficult time.
Yeah, and I feel very fortunate. I inherited the organization from the founder, who's just fantastic and had always made sure that we as an institution had the ability to invest in ourselves, and also to give us the room in case there was a rainy day. And so we were able to enter the pandemic in a strong financial position. The pandemic certainly slowed down our work because, I described how we work. We're actually, bringing people together in public space, and, we had to make the responsible decisions to make sure that we weren't contributing to the spread of the pandemic.
Yeah, and early on, I know that towns and communities were roping off playgrounds and saying, no one's allowed to play. Don't touch anything.
Yeah. And we actually pulled together an advisory group from a variety of disciplines, including several leaders in the public health field. And we put out guidance to communities on reopening playgrounds in a safe way. And we were among the first to say, until we know more, it's a responsible decision for communities to close playgrounds. Because at the time, no one knew how it was spreading. Now we know it's less about, touching surfaces and more about, what you're breathing. But at the time, no one knew that. And so, we always side on the side of being responsible, particularly when it comes to kids' health and well-being. And then as more became known, we put together this advisory group to help communities reopen playgrounds. On the financial side for the organization, it slowed down our work. We had to make some very tough decisions to scale back. And we made sure that we continued to invest in our future. And so we developed a 5-year vision for the organization that is all about eliminating Playspace inequity. And our goal is to eliminate that in Playspace inequity in 25 places over the next 5 years. And we recently announced that. And we were very fortunate that strategic visioning process dovetailed with just this amazing gift from MacKenzie Scott.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And it's just such, validation for the importance of the work. And it enables us to kickstart that initiative in a really robust way. And so we know from our experience that it's going to take a lot more than $14 million to eliminate place-based inequity in 25 places. We've set a goal of raising $250 million to do that. This $14 million gift is sort of the wind beneath our wings to really get started in earnest on that. And it's just, it's not just the amount of the gift, but the way that the gift was made. And I think this is a really important conversation for the philanthropic community. The gift was completely unrestricted. it was in support of our mission as a whole, where we as an organization get to decide how best to allocate those resources to achieve our mission, investing in ourselves, investing in our ability to collect data, in getting the right people on board as we grow, and so forth. And there's this misconception that a lot of philanthropists sort of fall into, that unrestricted giving is less accountable. And I actually think it's the absolute reverse of that. And it, from the perspective of someone who's been, in that leadership role in a nonprofit, getting an unrestricted gift is a huge responsibility, and most nonprofits take that incredibly seriously. And the way I like to think about it is, like, if you try to come up with an analogy in a different industry, like, everyone knows what it's like to go to a restaurant. Imagine if someone walks into a restaurant and says, I don't care what's on the menu, I'm going to pay $10, and I don't care what the prices are. I'm going to pay $10, and I want $7 of that to go toward the ingredients, $2 to go toward salary, and $1 toward rent. Or walking into like a pizzeria and saying, I don't want pizza today. I need you to make me some sushi. But that's the surreal conversations that are actually happening between funders and nonprofits, and it gets in the way of impact. Instead, an unrestricted gift like what MacKenzie Scott gave to Kaboom and so many others says to us, we're responsible for achieving outcomes. We're not responsible only for sort of this list of tactical deliverables that the funder thinks is important. We're responsible for making a difference in the world. And we're responsible to everyone for those outcomes. To me, that's a higher level of accountability. And my hope is that MacKenzie Scott and others like her are inspiring many more philanthropists to take that approach, because I think it's going to yield better results.
Yeah, well, we hope that has a lasting impact, and, as you said, inspires more people to give in a similar fashion. Lisa Ratcliffe is now the CEO at Kaboom and your senior fellow. Talk a little bit about that change and what that means in your new role.
Yeah, and well, first let me say this is going to be a little bit difficult for me to talk about, because it goes back to the beginning of the pandemic, and it was very personal family issues at play. But in the spring of 2020, as the pandemic was just, building up in the US, my wife, Beth, started to have health issues. She started to have trouble breathing and developed a cough. And, we would be out playing basketball as a family, and within a couple minutes she would get winded. And that is just not her. That's not normal. She was a college athlete. She was an elite Kung Fu martial artist. She's like the fittest person I know. And then all of a sudden she's like not able to exercise for more than a couple minutes. And, of course, our minds immediately went to, well, maybe she has COVID. But it was at a time, and I think, again, a lot of us forget, but like at the beginning of the pandemic, you were told, like, don't go get tested because unless you're having serious symptoms, because, limited ability to test, hospitals and doctors' offices are overrun. And so she waited for a couple of weeks while it was, it still felt pretty mild, but the symptoms wouldn't go away. So she finally got tested several times, always came back negative. And we're like, okay, well, if it's not COVID, what is it? And so through telemed visits, because she couldn't go into the doctor's office, the doctors went through a range of other options. Like, is it allergies? Because again, cars were off the road and nature was blooming, and maybe it was just serious spring allergies. And that turned out not to be the case. Then they thought it was, walking pneumonia. And that wasn't the case either. Finally, they said, come in, we're going to do an x-ray. And the x-ray was just not pretty. And so when we got the x-ray results, she was referred to an oncologist. She had been losing weight. We originally thought it was lymphoma. And at the time we were like, my God, how could this go from COVID or allergies or pneumonia to a cancer diagnosis? Um, and then it just got worse. So the meeting with the oncologist looked at the scans and said, I think it's lung cancer. And this is, again, for someone who's, you know, very active, never smoked a day in her life. And it turned out that it was stage 4 lung cancer that had spread all through her chest, abdomen, and even into her brain.
Oh my gosh.
And so we came home from that appointment with the oncologist, and our kids were in virtual learning at the time. They were 11, 13, and 14 at the time. So they were home. We came home and they said we had to tell them what was going on, which, you know, no parent should ever have to go through and no kid should ever have to go through, and went right to the hospital so that she could get a biopsy to confirm the diagnosis and start chemo as soon as possible. And that was just like the beginning, right? So chemo, they had to use like an incredibly, potent cocktail because the cancer was spreading so quickly. And so it just like, I've never seen anything like it. Again, you know, my wife is one of the strongest people, the strongest person I know. And what it was doing to her was just like unfathomable. This is a woman who has had knee surgery, Achilles surgery, 3 C-sections, and every time has basically turned down pain medication. You know, maybe some Tylenol, right? And the pain medication that she was prescribed for the chemo just never seemed strong enough. Like it was just that unbelievable. But she just kept fighting and emerged from the chemo. And she's been on, you know, a regimen after that that's based immunotherapy and some other drugs that are supposed to keep the cancer at bay, because lung cancer is not something that the goal is not remission. It's how do you live with lung cancer and keep it from growing and spreading. And she's been getting, you know, stronger and stronger, which is just, she just frankly amazes me every day. But to your initial question, like you can imagine that made me reflect differently on my professional life. At first I took a leave of absence because I had to be absolutely fully focused on my family during that time. And then as we were all as a family ready for me to start getting back, I wanted to make sure that I had a role where I felt like I could continue to put my family first. And I knew that wasn't going to be by, being in the corner office. And I consider myself incredibly, incredibly fortunate because I had a very supportive board. And I had a colleague in Lisa who had stepped into an interim CEO role and is absolutely perfect for the role of CEO. I'm, a nonprofit geek. That's how I, describe myself. I'm very focused on big picture strategic opportunities for the organization. That's what I'm able to work on now. And Lisa is all of that. And in addition to that, she has this unbelievable ability to convey the urgency of our cause and to create momentum by having just this amazingly positive, optimistic, welcoming approach to the work that just makes everyone want to be part of it. She is able to do things that I am not and was never actually able to do. And she's taking the organization to just new heights because of that. And I'm just so grateful that I'm able to be a part of it, and to do it in a meaningful way where it really plays to my strengths. Like I'm focused on strategic opportunities that may pan out for the organization 5 to 10 years from now, whether that's like, avenues for government funding or connections with ultra high net worth individuals and their philanthropy or crypto philanthropy or things like that. And I'm loving the work and loving seeing how Lisa is just like absolutely flying and thriving in the role and mobilizing the organization and taking it to that next level, it's better for me, it's better for my family, it's better for the organization. And I think we all would have wished it didn't happen because of the reason that it happened. But I'm grateful that we've come to this place because it's, I think, just it's better for everybody.
I'm so sorry to hear about this very frightening time for you and your family,
Yeah.
but glad to hear that your wife is on the mend and that Kaboom seems to be in good position too. Before I let you go, I want to ask you about crypto philanthropy and this intersection of Web 3.0 and social impact. What are you learning? What is your vision for 5 years down the road and longer?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I got interested in the crypto space early 2020. The way my brain works is I've got to hear it, something from a lot of different sources, and then it starts to weave together and I try to make sense of it. And so I'd been seeing a lot more coverage about crypto in mainstream media, but then it started to trickle into philanthropy media as well. And I said, I got to learn more. I got to pay attention to it. And I think as many have experienced when they start to get interested and curious about crypto and Web3, it's once you start, you can't stop. There's so many different layers to it. And it's so fascinating because it's like a window into how the world is changing. And so that was my experience. And then I was like, well, how do we start to get involved as an organization? And the first easy step was to get involved in accepting crypto donations. And the reason I say it was easy is because the ecosystem around crypto philanthropy has really grown and matured, particularly over the last year or so. And so we had the benefit of being able to connect with terrific partners like the Giving Block, where we're able to accept crypto donations, the program of the Better Business Bureau's Wise Giving Alliance, which is called Give Safely, which is their crypto philanthropy platform. And, Kaboom is a BBB accredited charity. So it adds that layer of sort of third party validation to trust that we're going to use the resources wisely. There's also Endowment, which is donor advised fund side of crypto philanthropy, which is a terrific organization. And more recently, Doing Good, which is a NFT platform, which enables creators to connect with causes that they care about. And it's sort of baked into the blockchain that a portion of the proceeds are going to a nonprofit. And so there's this ecosystem that we've been able to plug into, which has been really, really positive for our first foray into the crypto space. But then, if I'm looking more longer term, like that 5 to 10 year horizon, there are a couple of things that I'm focused on. The first is the ability of Web3 technology to ensure that there's true community ownership. And for us, it's like, well, I described our process, which is embedded in racial equity to ensure that communities that are most affected by decisions are the ones who are making the decisions and leading on the process. And Web3, I think, has a lot of potential to ensure that the folks that are closest to the problem are the ones who can drive those decisions and who can get rewarded for their participation. So we're starting to look at interesting ways that Web3 technology can inform and augment the community building process that we employ.
How do you think that looks in practice?
Well, you can envision a community experience through Web3 where, as you are taking action on behalf of a project, like, I'm going to help organize donations of equipment for the building of the playground, or food to feed volunteers, or I'm going to be the one rallying volunteers and so forth, that you get some type of reward for that participation that could either translate to, the ability to help make decisions around the layout of the playground or what goes on it or things like that, or could actually translate to some form of compensation. Because I think that a lot of times we ask a lot of folks who don't have a lot of resources. And we're in the community wealth business, right? Community assets like playgrounds, but the communities that we're working in also struggle with individual and family wealth issues. And so is there a way to actually compensate? And we've done some compensation of what would typically be volunteer roles, particularly when it comes to teenagers, folks, sort of college age, who are participating in our projects, because we think it's important, but you could see that expanding. But so that first area, I think is around that sort of community ownership of the project and incentive system to engage people as deeply as possible. The second area is around use of data to drive municipal budgeting decisions. Because like I said, if the decisions to invest in parks and play spaces is reinforcing the inequity that already exists, it makes it harder over time to close that gap, not easier. And so you can envision assessments like the one we did in Baltimore City Public Schools being used to drive allocation from municipal budgets. And Web3 blockchain technology used to make it fully transparent and make it more accountable as a result, because everyone will be able to see not just where the money is being spent, but how it links to the data that is saying where the need is greatest. And so both of those areas, I think, have a lot of potential. And we're just at the very early stages of thinking through that. But I think, crypto philanthropy is critically important as a way to bring more champions into our cause. And then figure out how to use the technology to actually improve the way we operate. That's what we're focused on.
It's fascinating. Any resources that you can share for people who want to learn more, since you've been studying up on it?
I listen to a lot of podcasts, and not necessarily ones that are specifically focused on social impact, just to learn more about the Web3 space. I think, there are just a lot of good ones out there. Money Reimagined, I think, is a really good one through CoinDesk, which includes Michael Casey from CoinDesk and Sheila Warren from the World Economic Forum. Really deep look at the financial systems and how Web3 is affecting that. I also have gotten involved in some communities in the Web3 space that are particularly focused on social impact. One that I really enjoy being part of is called Future Foundation, which was catalyzed by Dave Kim, who's on the financial services team at the Gates Foundation. And it just brings together a bunch of people from a lot of different disciplines focused on how Web3 intersects with social impact. And the basic thesis there is that, just like with Web 2, where you could have lofty goals, it may not come to fruition. So if you think about like some of the big tech giants, the big Web 2 tech giants, how their values are all about, democracy and transparency and connection and community, but then how the technology is actually used, including in some cases to mobilize hate groups, there's a disconnect. And I'm not naive. Web3 could also exacerbate inequity, just in the same way that it has the potential to eliminate inequity. And so the more that folks are coming together in community, where the specific focus is how do we make sure social impact is baked into Web3 from the beginning, the better. And so I'm trying to participate in those and encourage others who are interested to get involved as well.
Well, the more that we can learn and understand, hopefully we can be on the right side of that coin.
Yeah, exactly.
I like to ask all the Inspired Money guests, how do you define success?
Well, as you can imagine, it's changed over time, particularly recently. And, the first question that often gets asked, how do you define success is what matters most to you? What I've come to realize over the last couple of years is that the real question is, do I matter to the people that I care about? And so at a very personal level, success is defined by, am I there first and foremost for my family? When and how that they need me to be there. And then if I translate that to work, am I making a difference in equity and justice for the next generation? And, putting it together as, the dad of 3 children, am I instilling those values of justice and equity in my kids? So not easy to measure. And I'm an analytical person by nature, but when it comes to defining success, like it's more like these broad feelings that are important. Hard to measure, but incredibly important.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your professional path, your very personal story, and the great work that you're doing. Tell the Inspired Money listeners and viewers where they can find out more about Kaboom and where they can follow you.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at James Siegel, and for Kaboom, we're at Kaboom on all the social channels and kaboom.org. And please reach out. I'd love to learn more about what you're doing, and happy to share more about what we're doing. And Andy, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity. It's been a terrific conversation. Thank you, James. I appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing the 25 and 5 initiative to end Playspace inequity continue to spread across our nation. Thank you. So what was your favorite Inspired Money moment? I was expecting an inspiring story about playgrounds, which we totally got, but it was so much more. I like what James said about this being about dignity. It's incredible how building a playground can spark change not only in the lives of children, but for a greater community. Thank you again to James for being so open. It was powerful to hear his changing definition of success in the wake of his wife's cancer diagnosis. Check out kaboom.org for more information if you want to donate or volunteer to participate. Think about what causes align with your values and sign up to volunteer in your community. There's no doubt that there are those in need and that you can make a difference. If you had a different favorite Inspired Money moment, let me know by posting a comment below. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I want to invite you to subscribe to my email that goes out every 2 weeks. The Runnymede investment team highlights data, news, and events that we think are worth sharing. Subscribe at inspiredmoney.fm/newsletter. It's free and informative. Thank you so much for joining me on this mission. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.